Solomon was 46 years old, made $59,000 a year as a high school counselor, and for the past decade had perfected the art of sitting in silence. He was a master of the quiet nod, the noncommittal hum, the patient smile that absorbed insults like a sponge absorbs water. He had to be. It was the only way to survive dinner at his mother-in-law's estate in Buckhead. But the silence that had defined his marriage for 10 long years was about to be broken, not by a shout, but by a child's innocent whisper. It was his birthday, a Tuesday in late May. The air in their small Vine City bungalow was thick with the scent of sugar and melting wax. His son, Tobias, a luminous 7-year-old with his father's gentle eyes and a head full of bouncing twists that clicked with plastic beads when he moved, presented him with a folded piece of construction paper. "Happy birthday, Daddy!" Tobias's voice was a breathless rush of excitement. "I made it myself, but Mommy helped me write the words 'cause my spelling is still a little bit silly." Solomon's heart swelled. He unfolded the card. On the front, a waxy crayon drawing depicted two figures. One was tall, with a kind, lopsided smile. The other was small, holding his hand. Tobias had used a dark brown crayon for their skin, a detail that always made Solomon's chest ache with a specific, tender pride. "This is us, Daddy," Tobias had explained once, holding up a similar drawing. "We're black, and we're the best team." He opened the card. Inside, in his wife Deja's elegant looping script, it read, "Happy birthday to the best husband and father. We love you more than words can say." Below her name was Tobias's wobbly signature, and below that one more name written in a confident, unfamiliar hand. "All the best, Marcus." Solomon stared at the name. Marcus. He knew the name, of course. He'd been hearing it for 10 years. Marcus was the ghost at their wedding, the specter at every holiday dinner, the gold standard against which Solomon was perpetually measured and found wanting. Marcus was Deja's ex-boyfriend, the one her mother, Pearline, never let them forget. The high flyer. The one who got away. "Who's Marcus, Daddy?" Tobias asked, pointing a small finger at the signature. "Is he your friend?" Solomon looked from his son's curious face to the name on the card. The world seemed to slow down. The cheerful sounds of their small home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, faded into a dull roar. Why would Marcus, a man he had never met, a man who was supposed to be a footnote in his wife's history, be signing his birthday card? "I'm not sure, buddy," Solomon said, his voice strained. He forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Maybe a friend of Mommy's from work." But he knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut like a cold, heavy stone, that it wasn't a work friend. It was something else. It was the loose thread that, once pulled, would unravel everything. For 10 years, he had swallowed his pride, endured the endless comparisons, and held his tongue for the sake of peace, for the sake of his son. He had no idea the price of that peace was not just his dignity, but a figure so high it would take his breath away. What he didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a ghost, he was a creditor, and Solomon's own home was the bank. Have you ever felt like you were being tolerated in your own life? That your presence was an inconvenient footnote in someone else's grander story? Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to smile through a situation that was tearing you apart inside. Meeting Deja had felt like a miracle. Solomon was 35, a guidance counselor at a public high school in a tough neighborhood, making a modest but respectable salary. He lived in a small, rented apartment, drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, and found his wealth in the small victories. The student he helped get into a state college, the kid he convinced to stay in school. Then he met Deja at a friend's barbecue. She was brilliant, beautiful, and ambitious, a rising star in the marketing department of a major corporation. Her skin was a deep, radiant brown that seemed to glow, and she had a laugh that could fill a room. He fell for her fast and hard. He loved her drive, her intelligence, the way she could command a boardroom and then melt when he brought her a cup of coffee just the way she liked it. He didn't care that she came from money. In fact, he barely registered it until he met her family. Her mother, Pearline, was the matriarch of a world Solomon had only seen in magazines. She lived in a sprawling, 7-bedroom, 9-bathroom mansion in Buckhead, a fortress of white columns and perfectly manicured lawns valued at over $1.8 million. Pearline herself was a formidable woman, always dressed in expensive silks, her graying hair styled in an elegant, upswept coif. From their very first meeting, she looked at Solomon not as a potential son-in-law, but as a curious sociological specimen. Solomon, she had said, her voice cool and appraising, during their first dinner in her cavernous dining room. The table was set with $400 a plate Christofle silverware. Deja tells me you're a counselor at a school. How wonderful. It must be so rewarding to give back. The words were polite, but the tone was laced with a delicate condescension he would come to know intimately. It was the tone of someone who viewed a $59,000 salary not as a living, but as a hobby. And then came the first mention of Marcus. Deja used to date a young man, Marcus Jennings, Pearline announced to the table, as if Solomon wasn't there. He's in finance, just made partner at his firm in New York. A real go-getter. He bought his mother a house. A lovely one, right on the water. She sighed dramatically. They were such a handsome couple. Deja had squeezed his hand under the table, a gesture of apology. But she didn't say anything. She never did. Her silence became the backdrop to their life together. When they got engaged, Solomon used his entire savings, $7,000, to buy her a simple, elegant diamond ring from a reputable jeweler downtown. He was proud of it. It was the most expensive thing he had ever bought. At the engagement party, held, of course, at the Buckhead estate, Pearline cornered him by the champagne fountain. "It's a lovely ring, Solomon," she said, examining Deja's hand. "Very tasteful." She then turned to her sister, who was standing nearby. "Did I ever show you the ring Marcus gave Deja? It was a Cartier, 3 carats, flawless. I think it was valued at something like $85,000. Of course." She gave it back. She has such integrity. Solomon just stood there, his $89 Timex watch feeling suddenly heavy on his wrist, a stark contrast to the Rolexes and Patek Philippe's glinting on the wrists of the other men in the room. He felt small, diminished, a black and white photo in a world of vibrant color. Their wedding was a lavish affair, funded entirely by Pearline. It cost over $100,000. Solomon had wanted a small ceremony, something intimate and meaningful. Instead, he found himself standing at the altar of a massive church, looking out at 300 faces he didn't know. During her toast, Pearline once again conjured the ghost of Marcus. "I always thought Deja would marry a man who could give her the world," she'd said, raising her glass of $200 a bottle champagne. "But she chose a man with a big heart. And I suppose, in the end, that's what matters." The faint praise was a dagger, wrapped in velvet. They bought the bungalow in Vine City, a neighborhood with character and history, a place where people sat on their porches and knew their neighbors. It was all Solomon could afford to contribute to, but it was theirs. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that cost $220,000, a world away from Pearline's Buckhead Palace. Solomon loved it. He painted the rooms, planted a small garden in the back, and fixed the leaky faucet under the kitchen sink. He was building a life, a home. But Deja, he slowly realized, saw the bungalow not as a home, but as a temporary stop. She filled it with expensive things that seemed out of place, like a $4,000 Roche-Beaubois sofa that barely fit in their small living room, and a $1,500 Nespresso machine that took up half the counter space. Her salary as a vice president of marketing had climbed to $150,000 a year, and she spent it freely, a constant, unspoken reminder of the financial gulf between them. Their finances were technically merged in a joint account, but it was her income that paid for the luxuries, a fact Pearline never missed an opportunity to highlight. Solomon's salary covered the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the boring, invisible architecture of their life. Hers paid for the flash, and, as he would discover, for so much more. The 10 years that followed were a masterclass in quiet humiliation. The insults were rarely direct, but they were constant, a slow erosion of his self-worth. They came cloaked in concern, wrapped in backhanded compliments, and delivered with the casual cruelty of people who have never had to worry about money. Christmas was always the worst. The family gathered at Pearline's mansion, the air thick with the scent of pine and roasting turkey. The floor beneath the towering, professionally decorated Christmas tree was a mountain of expensive gifts. One year, when Tobias was 4, Solomon had spent weeks in his small workshop in the garage, lovingly handcrafting a wooden toy chest for his son. He'd sanded the pine until it was smooth as silk and stained it a warm cherry. It was a beautiful piece, made with love and care. On Christmas morning, after Tobias had joyfully opened it, Pearline had watched with a thin smile. How quaint, Solomon. A handmade gift. Later, as she handed Solomon his own present, she said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I never know what to get you." He opened the small, neatly wrapped box. Inside was a $50 Home Depot gift card. Minutes later, she was on the phone with her sister, gushing. "Did I tell you what Marcus sent me for Christmas? A 7-day Caribbean cruise. First class, of course. That boy always had such taste. He never forgets me." Solomon sat on the edge of a $12,000 Italian leather sofa, the $50 gift card feeling like a brand in his palm, and he just smiled. He smiled for Deja, who was busy showing off the $6,000 Chanel bag her mother had given her. He smiled for Tobias, who was happily putting his new toys in the chest his father had made. Another time, at one of the mandatory Sunday dinners, the talk turned to cars. Deja's cousin had just bought a new Audi Q7, a vehicle with a sticker price of over $70,000. "It's a beautiful car," Pearline had said, taking a delicate sip of wine. "But Marcus just traded in his Porsche for the new Maserati Gran Turismo, the one that starts at $150,000. He sent me a picture. It's absolutely stunning. He has such an eye for quality." She then turned her gaze to Solomon. "What are you driving these days, Solomon? Still that little Honda?" Solomon's car was a 2015 Honda Accord, paid off and perfectly reliable. It had 95,000 miles on it and had never once failed him. "Yes, Pearline, it's a great car. Gets me where I need to go." "I'm sure it does," she'd replied, her voice dripping with pity. He'd looked to Deja, hoping for a word, a glance, anything to show they were a team. But she just stared at her plate, meticulously cutting her filet mignon. Her silence was a betrayal all its own. It told him that on some level, she agreed with her mother, that he wasn't enough. The friction wasn't just confined to Buckhead. It bled into their life in Vine City. Deja often complained about their small house. "This kitchen is a nightmare," she'd say, gesturing at the perfectly functional but modest space. "I saw a kitchen in a magazine. It had Calacatta marble countertops and a wolf range. We should remodel. It would only be about $30,000. "Deja, we can't afford a $30,000 kitchen remodel," Solomon had argued gently one evening. "My salary just covers our main bills. If we save maybe in a few years." She cut him off, her voice sharp. Save? Solomon, I make good money. We shouldn't have to save for years just to have a decent kitchen. Marcus would have just done it. He understood that you have to spend money to live well. He never counted pennies. The name hung in the air between them, an accusation. You are not him, you are less. I'm not Marcus, Solomon had said, his voice quiet. I'm your husband. Exactly, she'd snapped, and walked out of the room, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen. She despised. The birth of their son should have been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. And it was for Solomon. Holding Tobias for the first time, he felt a love so fierce, it was terrifying. He looked at this tiny, perfect new person, his deep brown skin so soft, his little fingers curled around his own, and he swore he would do anything to protect him. Pearline and Deja's father arrived at the hospital a few hours later. Pearline peered into the bassinet, her face a mask of clinical inspection. Well, he certainly has Deja's eyes, and her nose. Thank goodness. Marcus had such lovely, intelligent eyes. Even here, in this sacred space, the ghost was present. Solomon felt a surge of cold fury. He looked at Deja, who was beaming, exhausted but happy in her hospital bed, seemingly oblivious to her mother's casual cruelty. Or maybe, he thought with a sudden chilling clarity, she wasn't oblivious at all. Maybe she just didn't think it was cruel. Maybe she agreed. That was the moment the first real crack appeared in the foundation of his love for her. He had papered it over, for Tobias's sake. He told himself it was just Pearline's way, that Deja was caught between her mother's world and his. He told himself that the acts of service he performed every day, packing Deja's lunch, making sure her car had gas, raising their son with a gentle and steady hand, were the true language of love, and that eventually she would see that. He had no idea how wrong he was. Over the years, the comparisons became a running joke among Deja's family, a joke Solomon was always the punchline of. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. At a summer barbecue, Deja's uncle clapped him on the back and said, "You're a good sport, Saul. It can't be easy following an act like Marcus." And Solomon, as always, just smiled his patient smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes. He endured it all because he believed in his vows. He believed in family. He believed that his quiet dignity, his steadfastness, was a form of strength. He thought he was playing the long game, that one day his worth would be recognized. He didn't realize the game was rigged, and he had been losing from the very start. The debt was accumulating in an account he didn't even know existed, and the bill was about to come due. The night of his 46th birthday, after Tobias was asleep, the house on its quiet Vine City street fell silent. The crumpled wrapping paper had been cleared away, the last of the cake put in the fridge. Deja was in their bedroom, scrolling on her phone, bathed in the cool blue light of the screen. Solomon sat in his small home office, a converted back porch that smelled of old books and dust. The birthday card from Tobias was on his desk. "All the best, Marcus." The name pulsed in the quiet room. Who was Marcus to sign a birthday card for his wife's husband? Who was he to be a "we" with his wife and son? It made no sense. It was a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit, a discordant note in a familiar song. At 11:17 p.m., driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand, Solomon turned to the old Dell desktop computer on his desk. It was a 7-year-old machine. Slow to boot up, but reliable. He opened a web browser and navigated to their joint bank's website. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed in the username and password. He and Deja had maintained a joint checking account since they were married. His modest paycheck was direct deposited, as was her much larger one. From this account, the mortgage was paid, the utility bills, the car insurance. It was also the account from which Deja did her spending, The designer clothes, the expensive lunches, the online shopping. Solomon rarely looked at the transaction history in detail. He trusted her. He managed their budget on a spreadsheet, tracking their major expenses, but he didn't micromanage her daily spending. It felt controlling, and besides, it was mostly her money anyway. That was the story he told himself. The account summary page loaded. A balance of $14,287.34. Normal. He clicked on the Activity tab. A list of recent transactions appeared. The mortgage payment to Wells Fargo, a charge from Publix for groceries, a $450 charge from Neiman Marcus, also normal. His heart was hammering against his ribs. This felt like a violation, a breach of the trust he had so carefully, and perhaps foolishly, maintained. But the name on the card had planted a seed of poison, and he had to know. He found the search bar in the transaction history. With a deep breath, he typed the name. Marcus. He hit enter. The screen refreshed, and there it was. A single line item from 6 weeks ago, an e-transfer, date April 5th. Description, e-transfer to Marcus Jennings. Memo, loan repayment, amount, $250. Solomon stared, his blood turning to ice. Loan repayment. It was plausible, he supposed. Maybe Marcus had loaned Deja a couple $100s for something years ago, and she was finally paying him back. It was strange, but perhaps not sinister. But the poison was already working its way through his veins. His hand, slick with a sudden cold sweat, moved the mouse to the date range filter. He selected the past year. He clicked search. The screen filled. 12 transactions, each for $250 or $300, each with a memo. Loan repayment, consulting fee, project reimbursement. His breath hitched. This wasn't a one-time repayment. This was regular. This was a pattern. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle over him. He felt a tremor in his hands and had to grip the edge of the cheap particle board desk to steady them. The quiet hum of the computer's fan seemed to grow louder, filling the silent room. He changed the date range again. Past 5 years. The page took a moment longer to load. When it did, he felt the air leave his lungs in a rush, as if he'd been punched. There were dozens of them. Page after page. Transfers ranging from $250 to as high as $5,000. The memos were all vaguely professional, corporate-sounding. Vendor payment, MJ Creative, service fee, Jennings Consulting, investment draw, M. Jennings, shell companies. He knew it instinctively, fake vendor names designed to look innocuous, all pointing back to one man, Marcus Jennings. He scrolled back, his eyes scanning the dates, the amounts. It started small, 6 years ago, just after Tobias had turned 1. A single transfer for $1,000, then another a few months later. The frequency and the amounts grew over time, a slow, steady drain on their finances. His finances, their joint account. He opened the calculator app on the computer. His fingers felt clumsy, numb. He started adding the numbers. $1,000? $2,500? $300? $4,800. The number on the calculator screen climbed with sickening speed. 10,000, 30,000, 70,000. He stopped when he passed $100,000. He couldn't go on. He leaned back in his worn-out office chair, the springs groaning in protest. He felt dizzy, nauseated. $100,000 gone, siphoned away to the man they always held up as his superior. The ghost wasn't a ghost, he was a thief. And his wife, his loving wife, the mother of his child, was his accomplice. She hadn't just tolerated the insults from her family. She had actively participated in a decade-long charade, smiling in his face while she bled their future dry to fund her past. The casual cruelty of the Christmas gift, The condescending remarks about his car, the arguments over a kitchen remodel. It all snapped into a new, horrifying focus. She hadn't been arguing about money. She had been protecting her secret budget line item. He looked at the picture of Tobias on his desk, his son's bright, innocent smile. Think about Tobias. Her voice would say this to him in arguments. It was a shield she used. Now it felt like a weapon. He closed the browser, stood up, and walked to the window. He stared out at the dark, quiet street of his Vine City neighborhood. The modest homes, the sleeping cars, the sense of community. This was the life he had built. This was the life she had secretly mortgaged to her ex-boyfriend. The cold calm that settled over him was terrifying. The 10 years of absorbing insults, of turning the other cheek, of being the good sport were over. The sponge was full. And he realized, with a clarity that cut through the pain, that he wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to confront her. That was her family's way. Loud, dramatic, full of empty gestures. His way would be different. It would be quiet. It would be methodical. And it would be final. The next morning, the world was painfully, unnaturally normal. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Solomon was at the stove, pouring pancake batter onto a hot griddle. He could hear the sizzle, smell the familiar, comforting scent. He was an automaton, his body going through the motions of a life that was no longer his. Tobias sat at the small kitchen table, chattering about a dream he'd had involving a talking squirrel and a spaceship made of waffles. Solomon listened, nodding and smiling, the muscles in his face aching from the effort. "That sounds like a fun dream, buddy," he said, his voice even. Deja came downstairs at 7:15 a.m., already dressed for work. She wore a deep blue St. John knit suit that cost at least $900 and carried a $2,800 Prada handbag. She looked powerful, polished, and completely oblivious. "Morning," she said, kissing the top of Tobias's head before pouring herself a coffee from the $1,500 Nespresso machine. "Something smells good." "Pancakes," Solomon said, flipping one onto a plate for Tobias. He didn't look at her. If he looked at her, he was afraid the carefully constructed dam of his composure would break. "Oh, yum. I don't have time for a real breakfast," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Big presentation today. I'll just grab a protein bar." She rummaged in the pantry. "Don't forget, we have dinner at my mother's on Sunday." "I won't," he said. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. She kissed his cheek, a quick, dry peck that felt like a spider landing on his skin. "Have a good day, you two. Love you." "Love you," he mumbled back to her retreating form. He watched her walk out the door, get into her gleaming white $80,000 Mercedes-Benz GLC, and drive away, off to her world of corporate success, a world built, in part, on his silent subsidy. He felt nothing. The rage and pain from the night before had cooled into a hard, dense ball of purpose in his chest. He was no longer a husband. He was a strategist. After dropping Tobias at school, he didn't go straight to work. He drove to a small park a few miles away and sat in his 2015 Honda Accord. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His finger hovered over a name he hadn't called in years. David Chen. David was his college roommate, one of the smartest people Solomon had ever known. They had been inseparable for 4 years, navigating late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. After graduation, David had gone into accounting, climbing the ladder with incredible speed. He was now a partner at a downtown firm, a forensic CPA, who specialized in uncovering complex financial fraud. Solomon took a deep breath and pressed the call button. "Solomon King, to what do I owe the honor?" David's voice was exactly as he remembered it, warm, sharp, and with a hint of a laugh. "Hey, David, It's been a while. Too long, man. How are you? How's the family? The question was a casual kindness that almost broke him. I'm I'm okay, David. Listen, I'm calling because I need a favor, a big one, and it needs to be completely off the books. The laughter in David's voice vanished, replaced by professional concern. Okay, I'm listening. I need an accountant, Solomon said, his voice low. A forensic one. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Solomon, what's going on? I can't talk about it over the phone. Can we meet? Today? My schedule is slammed, but for you? Yeah, of course. There's a coffee shop, Red Cat, on Peter Street. Meet me there at 1 p.m. And Solomon? Yeah? Don't say anything to anyone, not yet. The rest of the morning was a blur. Solomon went to his office at the high school. He met with a junior who was failing chemistry. He called the mother of a student who had been skipping school. He listened to their problems, offered advice, and filled out the necessary paperwork, his mind a million miles away. He was acting. This was the greatest performance of his life, pretending to be the same Solomon King he had been yesterday. At 12:45 p.m., he left work and drove to the coffee shop. He saw David through the window, already sitting at a small table in the back corner. He looked older, his hair flecked with gray at the temples, but he had the same intelligent, focused eyes. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Solomon's mortgage payment. Solomon sat down, his hands trembling slightly. He had printed out a few pages from the bank's website, the most damning ones. He slid the folder across the table. David opened it and began to read. He was silent for a full 5 minutes, his eyes scanning the pages, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "This is classic structuring, Soul," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Small, irregular transfers with plausible-sounding memos, designed to fly under the radar. The vendor name's MJ Creative. Jennings Consulting. Are they real?" "I have no idea," Solomon said, his voice hoarse. "The transfers are all to a Marcus Jennings." David nodded slowly. "Your wife's ex, the one her mother never shuts up about." Solomon must have looked surprised. "You forget, man. I was at your wedding. I heard the toast." A wave of shame washed over Solomon. Of course David knew. Everyone knew. "I need to know how much," Solomon said. "I need to know everything." "To do this right, I need full access," David said. "Bank statements, credit card statements, tax returns, for at least the last 7 years. Can you get them?" "Yes. They're all stored online. I have the passwords." "Okay." David leaned forward. "Listen to me. A full forensic audit like this, for a contested divorce case, my firm would bill between $20,000 and $30,000. My personal rate is $900 an hour." Solomon's heart sank. "David, I can't." David held up a hand. "I'm not billing you, you idiot. You're my friend. The software licenses and resources will cost me about $500. You can pay me that. The rest is on me. But you have to promise me something. Anything. You do exactly what your lawyer tells you to do. You don't get emotional. You don't confront her. You let the evidence do the talking. This isn't about revenge, Soul. This is about justice and protecting your son." He tapped the folder. "This is a crime. It's called dissipation of marital assets, and you are going to get every single penny back." He then pulled out a business card. "This is Alana Hayes. She's the best divorce attorney in Atlanta. Tough, smart, and she hates financial fraud more than anything. I'll call her and give her a heads up. Your first consultation will be free. Go see her tomorrow. And until then, you are the same happy, oblivious husband you were last week. Can you do that?" Solomon looked at his old friend, at the fierce loyalty in his eyes. For the first time in 10 years, he felt like he wasn't alone. He felt like he had a team. "Yes," Solomon said, his voice filled with a resolve he hadn't felt in a decade. "I can do that." He was playing dumb, but for the first time it didn't feel like an act of submission. It felt like an act of war. The next day, Solomon found himself in a different world. Alana Hayes' office was on the 35th floor of a gleaming glass tower in Midtown Atlanta. The reception area had polished marble floors, abstract art on the walls, and a panoramic view of the city. It was a place of power, a place where fortunes were won and lost. Alana Hayes was a striking black woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She wore an $8,700 Armani suit that radiated authority. She didn't waste time with small talk. "David Chen called me," she said, gesturing for Solomon to sit in a leather chair opposite her massive mahogany desk. "He speaks very highly of you. He also told me the basics. Your wife has been funneling marital assets to her ex-boyfriend. For how long? We don't yet know." Solomon, feeling out of place in his $60 department store blazer, explained the discovery of the name on the birthday card and the subsequent search of their bank records. He felt a familiar shame telling the story, laying bare the decade of quiet humiliations. Alana listened without interruption, her expression neutral. When he finished, she nodded. "The family dynamic you describe, the constant comparison, the financial disparity, is a common backdrop for this kind of betrayal. The wealthier spouse feels entitled, and the less wealthy spouse is conditioned to not ask questions, to be grateful. It's a perfect environment for financial infidelity." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Here is what we are going to do. First, David will conduct his audit. That is our foundation. It must be meticulous and irrefutable. While he does that, your job is the hardest one. You will do nothing. You will change nothing about your routine. You will go to family dinners. You will make pancakes for your son. You will continue to be the steady, reliable, slightly underestimated husband you have always been. Your wife and her family must not suspect a thing. Any deviation from your normal behavior could tip her off, and she might start covering her tracks." "How long will it take?" Solomon asked. "David is fast. A few weeks, maybe a month. Once we have his report, we will have our weapon. We won't be filing a messy public divorce petition right away. We won't be alleging an affair, which is hard to prove and often just creates drama. We will build a case for financial fraud. It's clean, it's provable, and the consequences are severe." She stood and walked to the window looking out over the city. "Your wife is a vice president at a publicly traded company, correct?" "Yes, a Fortune 500. Then she will have an employment contract, and that contract will almost certainly contain a morals clause or a clause regarding financial integrity and conduct that could bring the company into disrepute. Grand-scale financial fraud against her own family would most likely qualify as a breach." A cold chill went down Solomon's spine. He hadn't even considered her job. "Our strike will be coordinated and precise," Alana continued, turning back to him. "We will deliver our findings, not just to her, but to the people who have power over her. The goal is not to embarrass her. The goal is to create maximum leverage to ensure the swift and full return of every dollar she took from the marital estate. Your son's future. Are we clear?" "Yes," Solomon said. The word felt solid, real. "Good," Alana said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "Now go home, be normal, and let us do the work." Living the lie was the hardest thing Solomon had ever done. Every interaction with Deja was now filtered through the lens of her betrayal. Her laughter sounded hollow. Her touch felt like a violation. He had to fight the urge to flinch when she kissed him goodbye. That Sunday, they went to Perline's for dinner. The air in the Buckhead mansion felt heavier than usual, charged with a dramatic irony only he was aware of. He sat at the long, polished dining table, a silent observer in the theater of his own life's destruction. Perline was in rare form. "I have the most wonderful news," she announced, beaming. "Marcus is engaged. To a neurosurgeon at Emory. Can you imagine? So brilliant. And her family has a home in Martha's Vineyard. Finally, a woman who is on his level. I'm just so thrilled for him." She looked directly at Solomon as she said it, a triumphant, pitying glint in her eye. The message was clear. Even now he is winning. And you are still you. Solomon just picked up his water glass. "That's wonderful news, Perline. Please send him my congratulations." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She had expected him to be sullen or quiet. The direct, cheerful response threw her off. Deja shot him a strange look from across the table. For a second, he thought he saw fear in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Later, while he was helping Tobias with his jacket, Deja came up to him. "That was nice of you. What you said about Marcus." "Why wouldn't it be?" Solomon asked, his voice a perfect imitation of mild curiosity. "He's an old friend of the family. We should be happy for him." He was learning. He was learning to use their own weapons against them. Polite, meaningless words that concealed a core of cold, hard steel. A week later, David's preliminary report came in. He had found transfers totaling over $120,000, and he was still digging. He had also, through a discreet source, gotten a copy of Deja's corporate phone records. The same day she had a big presentation, she had a 47-minute phone call with a number registered to Marcus Jennings. That evening, Solomon was in the living room when Deja got off the phone laughing. "That was just Sarah from college," she said, tossing her phone onto the $4,000 sofa. "She is such a mess." Solomon just nodded, his eyes on the television. "That's nice," he said. The casualness of the lie was what hurt the most. It was so easy for her, so practiced. The final, most surreal moment of this strange purgatory came 2 weeks before the strike. Deja came home in a panic. "Solomon, I can't find it anywhere. My diamond earring." It was one of a pair her parents had given her for her 30th birthday, valued at over $3,000. "I think it might have fallen off at the gym. I've looked everywhere." Solomon felt a wave of nausea. David's full report had landed in his inbox that morning. It was a 200-page monument to her deceit. The final number was $178,432.19, and buried in the detailed analysis of her credit card statements was a small, easily missed item, a transaction from a pawn shop on the other side of town. The day she lost the earring, she had pawned it for $800 cash. The audit showed a corresponding cash deposit into an account he'd never heard of, followed by an immediate wire transfer to one of Marcus's shell companies. He stood there, looking at his frantic, lying wife, and he felt a profound and terrible pity for her. "Don't worry," he said, his voice gentle. "We'll look for it together." And he did. He got on his hands and knees and helped her search under the sofa cushions, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. He was not just playing dumb anymore. He was a ghost in his own home, watching the last act of a play whose ending he had already written. The final meeting with Alana Hayes took place on a Thursday afternoon. Solomon sat in her office, the 200-page forensic audit from David sitting on the desk between them like a bomb. It was bound in a simple black cover, its unassuming appearance belying the devastation within. Alana had a file open in front of her. "David has done extraordinary work," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "The report is irrefutable. It details 114 separate transfers over 6 years, funneled through 3 different shell entities all registered to Marcus Jennings. The total comes to $178,432.19. She slid a document across the desk to Solomon. This is the divorce petition. It cites financial dissipation as the primary grounds. We are petitioning the court for an unequal distribution of assets to reimburse you for the full amount stolen from the marital estate. Next, she slid over another document. This is a formal demand letter to your wife, care of her attorney, for the immediate return of the funds. It references the forensic audit as evidence. Finally, she picked up 2 thick, spiral-bound packets. They were executive summaries of David's report, just the highlights, the most damning charts, and a list of every single transfer. And these are the real weapons. One packet will be delivered by courier to her mother's family attorney on Monday morning, Alana explained. This ensures Pearline is immediately aware of the legal and financial jeopardy her daughter has created. It neutralizes her as a potential ally for Deja. She tapped the second packet. And this one will be delivered simultaneously to the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at her company. It will be accompanied by a cover letter from me, simply stating that we have uncovered evidence of significant financial misconduct by one of their executives and are providing it as a professional courtesy, as it may pertain to clauses within her employment contract. Solomon stared at the packets. It was so clinical, so precise. You're sure this will work? Solomon, Alana said, meeting his gaze. Powerful people and large corporations do not like messes. They especially do not like messes involving fraud. An employee stealing from her own family is a massive liability. It speaks to character, judgment, and trustworthiness, all essential qualities for a corporate vice president. They will not risk the bad press or the internal precedent. They will cut their losses. They will fire her. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. This is not about revenge. This is about consequences. She made a series of choices over 6 years. On Monday, she will be presented with the bill for those choices. Your only job now is to not answer the phone. Before the meeting ended, Solomon pulled a small $49.99 digital voice recorder from his pocket. I did one more thing, he said, feeling a slight flush of embarrassment. I know you said it's not for court, but I needed it for me. He told her about the conversation he'd staged a few nights before. He'd been sitting with Deja on the sofa, watching TV. During a commercial, he'd turned to her, his expression one of idle curiosity. You know, I was thinking about our 10th anniversary trip, he'd said casually. Maybe we should finally go to Italy. And it made me think of your mom talking the other day. Whatever happened to that guy she always mentions? Marcus? He played the recording for Alana. Deja's voice, at first relaxed, instantly became sharp and defensive. Marcus? Why on earth would you bring him up now? He's ancient history, Solomon. I haven't thought about him in years. It's weird that you're even asking. Alana listened, then nodded slowly. The denial is too fast. The anger is a shield. You caught her, and she knew it. You don't need this for the legal case, Solomon. But I understand why you needed to hear it for yourself. He left her office and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time, he felt the weight of the last decade begin to lift. He was no longer a victim. He was an agent of consequence. The 10 years of cold, quiet suffering were about to be balanced by one swift, surgical morning. He drove home, picked up Tobias from school, and made spaghetti for dinner, the last supper of his old life. Monday morning arrived, gray and overcast. Rain slicked the streets of Atlanta, the sky weeping for a life that was about to die. Solomon went through his morning routine with a preternatural calm. He made oatmeal for Tobias, packed his son's lunch, and saw Deja off to work. She was wearing a cream-colored Burberry trench coat that cost $2,400, a shield against the rain, and the coming storm she knew nothing about. "Try to have a good day," she said, her standard parting line. "You too," he replied, and watched her drive away. He took Tobias to school, then drove to his own job at North Atlanta High School. He sat at his small metal desk in the guidance counseling office, a framed crayon drawing by Tobias his only personal touch. He looked at his $89 Timex watch. The second hand swept around the dial, each tick a countdown, 9 a.m. He pictured a courier in a rain slicker walking into the lobby of a stately Buckhead law firm, 9:15 a.m. He got a text from Alana, package 1 delivered, signed for by reception, 9:17 a.m. He pictured a second courier, this one navigating the soaring, impersonal lobby of Deja's corporate headquarters downtown. He imagined the elevator ride to the 42nd floor, the hushed tones of the executive wing. 9:30 a.m. Another text from Alana, package 2 delivered, handed directly to the SVP of HR's executive assistant. The clock is ticking. Solomon put his phone face down on his desk. He opened a student's file and tried to focus on their transcript. He couldn't. He was listening to the silence, waiting for the first tremor. It came at 9:45 a.m. His phone buzzed. Deja's face appeared on the screen. He stared at it, his heart a steady, slow drum. He let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the voicemail notification appeared. He put in his earbuds and pressed play. "Solomon, what is this? My mother's lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, just called me screaming. He's saying you've made some kind of insane accusation. He's faxing me documents. What the hell is going on? Call me back now." Her voice was sharp, angry, but laced with a thread of confusion. He deleted the message. He looked at the student's file again. He managed to read a full paragraph before his phone buzzed again. 10:02 a.m. Deja again. He let it ring. The voicemail icon popped up. He listened. "I just got called into an emergency meeting. With HR Solomon, they have papers. They have bank statements. What did you do? They're asking me about Marcus Jennings. What did you do?" The anger was gone, replaced by pure, high-pitched panic. He deleted the message. A student poked her head into his office. "Mr. King, do you have a minute?" "Of course, Maria. Come on in," he said, his voice impossibly steady. For the next 20 minutes, he talked a terrified sophomore through her options for retaking a failed algebra class. He was calm. He was present. He was the counselor he was meant to be. As Maria left, his phone buzzed violently on the desk. 10:30 a.m. Another voicemail. He listened. This time, it was rage. A cornered animal lashing out. "This is insane. These are lies. You twisted everything. You're trying to ruin me because you were always jealous. You were always jealous of Marcus, of my family, of my success. You couldn't stand that I was better than you, so you cooked up this disgusting fantasy to destroy me. You pathetic little man." He recognized the words. Pathetic. Little. They were echoes of things Perline had said, things Deja had implied for years. Hearing them now, stripped of their polite veneer, they had no power. He deleted the message. He spent the next 45 minutes on the phone with a college admissions officer, advocating for one of his students. He was focused, persuasive. He was good at his job. 11:15 a.m. The phone buzzed. Another voicemail. The tone had shifted again. Now, it was pleading. Okay, look, I can explain it. It wasn't what it looks like. It was a loan, a business thing. It was complicated. I was going to tell you, please, Solomon, just call me. We can fix this. We can go to HR together and explain. Please. Think about Tobias. Don't do this to our family. Think about Tobias, the phrase she had always used as a shield. He felt a flicker of something. Not pain, but a deep, weary sadness for the woman who could only see their son as a bargaining chip. He deleted the message. The final call came just after noon, as he was eating his sandwich at his desk. He let it go to voicemail, but this time he waited a few minutes before listening. He knew this would be the last one. He pressed play. The sound that came through the earbuds was not a voice. It was a raw, ragged sob, a sound of complete and utter unraveling. "They fired me," she choked out between gasps. They walked me out, in front of everyone. My security pass is gone. They're enforcing the morals clause. I have to pay back my signing bonus, $250,000. Solomon, please. You've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything." He listened to the end of the message, to the sound of her weeping, until the recording cut off. He took out his earbuds and set them on the desk. He looked at the drawing from Tobias. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction. He just felt quiet. The 10 years of cold were over. The debt was paid. A great and terrible silence settled over him, the silence of a battle that was finally, completely, won. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of Deja's choices, now laid bare for the world to see. Alana Hayes had been right. Powerful people and corporations abhor a mess. First, there was Deja. Her termination was immediate and brutal. Fired for cause, specifically for gross misconduct and actions bringing the company into disrepute. She was ineligible for any severance. The enforcement of the morals clause in her $4.2 million employment contract was catastrophic. Not only was her $150,000 annual salary gone, but the company initiated legal proceedings to claw back her $250,000 signing bonus from 3 years prior. Overnight, she went from a high-flying corporate executive to an unemployed, blacklisted pariah. News travels fast in the tight-knit world of corporate marketing. No one would touch her. Her career, the entire source of her identity and pride, was over. Next was Pearline. The call from her family's attorney, Mr. Abernathy, had been apoplectic. The evidence packet, with its cold, hard numbers, was an indictment not just of Deja, but of the family's entire culture of financial carelessness and entitlement. Abernathy's firm billed the family trust $12,000 for the initial damage control and legal advice, a bill Pearline had to pay. But the financial cost was nothing compared to the social cost. The story, in its broadest strokes, leaked out into the Buckhead community. The whispers at the country club, the sudden silence when she entered a room, the shame was a currency she was not accustomed to dealing in. Her daughter, the one she had always bragged about, had brought scandal to their door. The perfect facade had crumbled. Then came Marcus. Alana's firm, as promised, sent a certified letter to him in New York. It didn't threaten a lawsuit for alienation of affection. It was far more dangerous. It laid out a case for conspiracy to commit fraud and unjust enrichment. Faced with the prospect of a lengthy, expensive, and deeply embarrassing legal battle, not to mention the forensic audit that detailed his shell companies, Marcus folded immediately. His lawyer contacted Alana's office within 48 hours. He agreed to a settlement, signing a legally binding repayment plan for his half of the stolen funds, $89,216.09, to be paid directly to Solomon over 2 years. His neurosurgeon fiancé, upon learning that her brilliant, high-flying fiancé was, in fact, a co-conspirator in a scheme to defraud a high school counselor, promptly broke the engagement and gave back the very expensive ring. The divorce proceeded with astonishing speed, with the irrefutable evidence of financial dissipation, The judge had little patience for Deja's attempts to frame herself as the victim. The court ordered the immediate sale of the Vine City bungalow. After the mortgage was settled, the remaining equity was split. More importantly, the judge granted Solomon's petition for an unequal distribution of marital assets. A lien was placed on all of Deja's remaining assets, her personal stock portfolio, her 401k, and her $80,000 Mercedes. She was forced to liquidate everything. The court clerk handed Solomon a check for the full verified amount of the fraud, $178,432.19. He was made whole. Solomon never spoke to Deja or Pearline again after that final voicemail. All communication went through their lawyers. He had packed a bag for himself and Tobias the day of the strike, and they had stayed in a modest extended-stay hotel for 2 weeks, a $120 a night temporary home that felt more peaceful than the bungalow had in years. He ensured Tobias was shielded from all of it. To his son, it was a simple story. Mommy and Daddy have decided it's better to live in different houses, but we both love you very, very much. Tobias, with the simple resilience of a loved child, accepted this. His world was his father, and his father was rock solid. The storm raged, but Tobias was safe in the eye of it. The child was, as he must always be, safe, loved, and emotionally secure. 2 years later, the rain had long since stopped. A bright, hopeful Atlanta sun shone down on a community garden in a quiet, leafy neighborhood near Grant Park. Solomon, now 48, pushed a wheelbarrow filled with rich, dark soil. His salary as a school counselor had seen a modest cost of living increase to $62,000 a year, and it was more than enough. He and Tobias, now 9, lived in a clean, bright 2-bedroom rented apartment overlooking the garden. The walls weren't filled with expensive art, but with the vibrant, joyful chaos of Tobias's drawings. The air didn't smell of Pearline's expensive perfumes, but of the fresh basil growing in a pot on their windowsill. It was a smaller life, a simpler one. It was an infinitely wealthier one. Tobias ran up to him, his locks, now longer, bouncing on his shoulders. He held up a piece of paper with a new drawing, made with the same brown crayon he always favored. It showed 2 figures, one tall, one a little less small, standing next to a large, smiling sunflower. "That's you, Daddy, and that's me," Tobias said, his voice full of the unfiltered honesty that had started it all. "And that's our garden. We're a team." "The best team," Solomon said, his voice thick with emotion. He took the drawing and promised to hang it on the refrigerator next to the dozen others. The $178,432.19 he had recovered was not in his bank account. After setting aside a small portion for Tobias's college fund, he had used the rest to create a non-profit organization. He called it the Tobias Fund. It was a mentorship and scholarship program for at-risk youth at his high school and others like it across Atlanta, helping kids who, like him, came from modest means but had big hearts and big dreams. It was a fund built not on stolen money, but on reclaimed integrity. There was one last piece of business. A few months after the divorce was final, Alana had called. Deja had requested a final meeting to sign some transfer documents for her depleted 401k. She had asked to do it in person. Solomon agreed. He met her at a neutral, anonymous Starbucks on Lexington Avenue. The woman who sat across from him was almost unrecognizable. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn sweater. Her hair was pulled back simply, and the fire of ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. She looked diminished, smaller. She signed the papers without a word. Then she looked up at him, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry, Soul," she whispered, her voice cracking. "For everything. For the money. For my mother. For not appreciating you. I was a fool." Solomon looked at her, the woman he had once loved so fiercely, and he felt the last embers of his anger turn to ash. There was nothing left but a profound, quiet sadness for the life she could have had, the person she could have been. He had forgiven her long ago, not for her sake, but for his own. Forgiveness was the key that unlocked his own prison. "I know," he said softly. "I hope you find peace, Deja." He stood up, signed his own name on the document, and walked out of the coffee shop into the afternoon light, leaving his past sitting at the table. He didn't look back. As he stands at his apartment window now, watching Tobias chase a butterfly in the garden below, Solomon understands the nature of true wealth. It isn't found in the cold marble of a Buckhead mansion or the fleeting status of a $150,000 Maserati. It isn't measured by a salary or the brand of a suit. True wealth is the solid ground of integrity beneath your feet. It's the pride in a child's drawing, rendered in a brown crayon. It's the quiet joy of a shared life, built not on lies, but on love and service. He had been compared to a man who took, and in the end, he had become a man who gave. And in that, he had found everything. What do you think is the most important measure of a person's character? Is it what they have or what they give? Share your thoughts with our community below. And if you found inspiration in Solomon's journey, be sure to follow Love Beyond Pride for more stories of truth, justice, and the power of quiet strength.